Exercise 21, this is working with the digestive system. So the overall function of the digestive system is the intake of food, the break down the food to release the nutrients from it. You also have to absorb those nutrients and then eliminate any waste products from it. So just kind of a summary diagram. As you can see, obviously you're going to take in the food in your mouth and then chew it up into bite-sized pieces and then swallow it, and it's going to move down the esophagus to the stomach, small intestines, large intestines, and then finally out. And then this also shows some of the accessory structures, such as your salivary glands, your teeth in your mouth, the liver, the gallbladder, the pancreas, etc. So we're going to look at all of this. So with the digestive system organs, you have got, oftentimes it's referred to as the alimentary canal. It's about 25 feet if you stretched it out in an adult. And in this canal, the digestive canal is the mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestines, large intestines, and then the anus. As the food is eaten, as you put it in your mouth, it is considered, while it's in this canal, think of it like a tube, and so it's actually considered to be part of the outside of the body because it has not penetrated across the membrane to get into the internal part of the body. It's in this tube that's in the body. The accessory structures that I mentioned just a bit ago are going to help with the assisting in the breakdown of the food items. One thing to keep in mind is that as the food is moving, some of this is going to be what we call propulsion, which is moving the food item through the digestive system. It's going to involve chemical digestion, mechanical digestion, and then absorbing. So you have several processes, and some of these are occurring in the same location. So let's start at the mouth, and we'll follow all the way as it moves through this digestive system. In the mouth, obviously, you're ingesting the food, you're taking it in, you're going to chew it. As you're chewing it, you're mixing it with your saliva. Remember, in order to taste it, it must be liquid and penetrate down in those taste buds on the tongue. In the mouth, part of the saliva has various enzymes such as amylase. Amylase specifically helps to break down starch. So your carbohydrate, in a little bit for the lipid digestion, but mostly carbohydrate digestion, actually begins in the mouth. You're going to move that food around your mouth as you're chewing, you're mixing it with the saliva, getting into small enough pieces where then you will move the food towards the back of the oral cavity or the mouth, and you're going to eventually swallow and move it down into the pharynx. So you're moistening that food, you're dissolving things. The saliva is also going to help to clean your teeth and lubricate the mouth, and it does contain some enzymes trying to kind of control some of the you want some antimicrobial activity to be controlled in there. So in other words, it's not sterile. You know that there are bacteria in your mouth, but you just don't want it to get completely overloaded. So in the mouth, excuse me, we look at this diagram showing the different parts in the mouth. So if you look up at the, here's the upper lip, obviously your teeth. The hard palate is here for the back. It's the soft palate. Here's the uvula, that little piece that you see hanging down, that little cartilage. Remember that flips up to keep the food from going up into the nasal cavity. And then obviously you have your tongue. Now this also on this bit talks about the teeth, the back teeth. You've got your molars, the premolars, your cuspid or canines, and then in front your incisors. And the teeth look different because they have different purposes. Are they for tearing? Are they for chewing? And now the tongue helps to position the food for chewing it. It helps to position the food also for swallowing. You also use the tongue for vocalization or talking. And as I just said a bit ago, your taste buds are there. The salivary glands secrete, on average, between 1 and 1.5 liters per day. There are several different salivary glands. There's the submandibular glands, the sublingual glands, and the parotid glands. In the fall of 2020, there were some newly discovered glands called the tuberous glands. That's back in the nasopharynx area. So you may not read about those all in books because it's relatively new. As I said, the saliva is going to moisten the food. It helps. The bolus is what we call the food item when you swallow it, so it's helping to form that. Um, this just shows the placement of the salivary glands. As I said just a bit ago, your teeth, you have 20 deciduous teeth or baby teeth, and then the permanent teeth, there's 32 total. The 8 incisors, those are the front teeth that are for biting. The canines are for tearing food. The premolars are for mashing the food, and the molars get it ready for swallowing. The molars, that does include your 4 wisdom teeth, of which some people have those and some don't. Some people who have them never have to get them removed, and some people, it, they don't really know why. It could be genetics. They don't really know why. Though some people have wisdom teeth, some don't. Those with it, some have problems, some don't. When you look at the tooth itself, in terms of the anatomy of it, the portion that you see, that portion that's above the gum line, is called the crown. The root is the part that's below the gum, and it's helping to hold it into the bone in that joint. That's considered a joint. The pulp cavity contains the nerves and the blood vessels in there. The root canal, this is part of the pulp cavity that's in the root portion of the tooth. Surrounding the pulp cavity, you have a hard tissue called the dentin, and then surrounding that is the enamel that's on the crown or the portion above the gum. And then the tooth is held in that socket, in that joint, by the periodontal ligament. And so this is just showing a diagram of all of these various components of the tooth. When you swallow food, excuse me, it's going to go from the mouth. Now, some people mistakenly say, oh, it goes straight from the mouth to the esophagus. No, it has to pass through the pharynx first. That connects the oral cavity to the esophagus. It's going to close off, your epiglottis is going to close off the trachea and the larynx so that the food or drink cannot go down and get into the lungs. And so the pharynx, food goes down there. It helps to direct it towards the esophagus. If food does enter into the larynx or the trachea, there's an instinctive reflex of coughing that it's a protective and survival mechanism to try to force it out. Now, if someone is choking, you will not hear sound. So if someone is coughing and making sound, usually they say just leave them be. It's the body's natural way of trying to clear the airway. And that if they're coughing, that sound, that means air is at least getting into the lungs. So on this diagram, you can see it's color coded. The kind of turquoise blue area is the nasal cavity. The pinkish area is the oral cavity, so that's obviously where you ingested your food. The purple area is the pharynx, and then that greenish area is the larynx, so you don't want the food going down there. So notice that now the esophagus is located directly behind your trachea. So the food from the pharynx is going to go into the esophagus. The esophagus is going to, through this process called peristalsis, slowly move that food item down towards the stomach. Now, there is a sphincter or a muscle. Sphincter, remember, is a circular muscle. It is smooth muscle, so there's no voluntary control of it. It goes by different names, but it's all the same muscle. Some books call it the lower esophageal sphincter. A lot of places refer to it as the gastroesophageal sphincter, and some the cardiac sphincter. When this muscle opens, what it does, it will allow food to move from the esophagus to the stomach. You do not want this opening open all the time because the stomach is very acidic, and you don't want those gastric juices to come up into the esophagus because those cells aren't protected from the acidity, and so it can cause damage to it. And so, excuse me, where we're talking about for the sphincter is way down here, right at that connection. So food coming down the esophagus, it's going to be a regulated thing of controlling. Usually it's the pressure on it that then opens it, allows the food item to enter the stomach. So that is not open all of the time. Swallowing or degglutination is that act of swallowing. You have to kind of coordinate the muscles. You obviously don't think about it, but you do have to think about coordinating the muscles of the tongue and the pharynx and the esophagus. The tongue helping to push the food item back towards the back of the oral cavity and into the pharynx, and at the same time allowing the pharynx to accept that food. So it's a control way of pushing the food down. So part of this is voluntary, and then part of it's basically, it reaches a certain point, it's going down. The stomach, once the bolus reaches the stomach, it's going to be mixed with the gastric juices and this churning and mixing, and the bolus now, as it's mixing with all those gastric juices, it's going to form what we call chyme. This is now going to begin the chemical breakdown of protein. So in the mouth, you started with mechanical breakdown by chewing, some chemical breakdown of breaking down carbohydrates. Because the stomach is so acidic, that carbohydrate digestion, that is going to stop when it hits the stomach because the acid inhibits it. And now instead you're going to start the breakdown of the protein in there. And this is, once again, a chemical type of digestion. What will happen is it's going to be mixing and churning, and then slowly the chyme is going to be released from the stomach in very small, very controlled, regulated amounts into the opening of the small intestines. Now, the area of the small intestines that is connected to the stomach is known as, depending on where in the country you are, some people will pronounce it as the duodenum and others will pronounce it as the duodenum. It just, different areas have different pronunciations of it. But that is just referring to the beginning portion of the small intestines. So that's what is receiving the chyme from the stomach. And as I said, it's not all released at once. It's going to be released in very small amounts so that there are other substances basically that will act as a buffer because you have to neutralize the acid because it is the stomach. The acidity there is about pH of 2, so that's very, very acidic. The stomach can absorb some fat-soluble substances such as alcohol and aspirin. So you do need to be careful, like with aspirin, as to the amount of aspirin you take to not cause damage to the stomach. The structure of the stomach, it's divided into 4 regions. You have the cardia region. This is where the food is passing from the esophagus into the stomach. The fundus, which is kind of a dome-shaped upper portion. The body is the main portion of the stomach, and the pylorus is where the stomach connects to the small intestines. There are folds in the stomach when it's empty, called the rugae, and then as the stomach is filled, these folds they extend out, allowing the stomach to expand and hold more volume. So in the diagram up here, as you can see, the esophagus is right here. There's a connection to the stomach. So this first initial part right here is the cardia, here's the fundus. The main part of the stomach is called the body. And then down here is the pyloric region. Here's the pyloric sphincter now that is going to regulate the release of the substances or the chyme from the stomach into the small intestines. What's going to happen is the food, it's going to come in, it's going to mix, you release a little bit. Take it, mix it some more, release a little bit. Mix it more, release it more. Another thing on the stomach here is to notice the orientation of the fibers on the muscle. They have several different layers. Some fibers this way, some at this angle, some at a different angle. That makes it much more efficient at the mixing. Now in the small intestines, that kind is going to mix with the digestive juices to help neutralize that pH. Like I said, now the movement, once it gets from the stomach into the small intestines, it's going to move very slowly through the small intestines. And the reason for that is this is where most of the absorption takes place. So you don't want it to move too fast, or you may not be able to absorb all the nutrients. Slow it down so you have maximum efficiency of absorption occurring. Now you had protein digestion occurring in the stomach, because remember the carbohydrate from the mouth stopped because of the acid. Now that you're in the small intestines, you had digestive juices added. This is going to help with the breakdown of carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. It's going to neutralize that pH. You're having some physical digestion occurring, more mixing, etc. So there's a lot going on in the small intestines as far as the absorption function of the digestive system. How long is the small intestines? About 10 feet. It's called the small intestines because the diameter is only about an inch. Lengthwise, it may be longer than the large intestines, but the large versus small intestines, the name gets it from the diameter of the intestines. It's only about an inch. There's 3 different regions. As we just mentioned earlier, the pyloric sphincter is that opening from the stomach into the small intestines. And the first beginning section of the small intestines is called the duodenum. You have the bile duct and the pancreatic duct fused together, and they are going to drain here. So they are adding bile, as we'll see in a bit, that helps with lipid digestion, and the pancreatic juices help with carbohydrate digestion. And so they're added at the very beginning of the small intestines. The middle section of the small intestines is known as the jejunum, and then the ileum is the last section, and it is the longest of the 3 sections. So these are your 3 different sections of the small intestines. And then at the end, you have the ileocecal sphincter, which is where you connect the small intestines to the large intestines, which that area of the large intestines is known as the cecum, so that's why ileocecal, where the name comes from. So in this diagram, you can see it's color-coded with the 3 different regions of the small intestines. Small intestines, if you look at it microscopically, well, macroscopically, visualize, you can see there's lots of folds, and then macroscopically, you have a lot of further indentations and folds. All of that is increasing surface area. That allows for increased absorption to occur. Some of these folds also slows down the kindness that's moving through. Once again, if you slow it down, that increases the absorption. The large intestines now, the food moves into the large intestines, you are going to finish breaking down any residuals. Most of the absorption of nutrients has occurred. In the large intestines now, you can absorb water, you can absorb various electrolytes, sodium, potassium, things like that. You can absorb vitamins. There are bacteria that are naturally present in our large intestines. We need those. Some of them are responsible for making and producing some vitamins that we could not do on our own. And so these are located in the large intestines, producing some vitamins, and then we are absorbing those. There's some mucus production that's going to help with the movement of the waste material of the feces through the colon. When you talk about colon, you're talking about the large intestines. So you can store that waste, and then, so you're not releasing it continuously, store it, and then eliminate the feces kind of at one time. The large intestines is about 5 feet in length, but the diameter is 3 inches. Remember, the small intestines was only about 1 inch in diameter. 4 regions of the large intestines. You have that ileocecal valve. That's once again a valve controlling the flow from the small intestines into the large intestines. The cecum, that is the beginning section of the large intestines. Then you have the colon, which refers to the ascending colon is, we'll see, it's going to move in this order, and you'll see next in the picture. The transverse, the descending, and then the sigmoid. And then from the colon, the waste products move to the rectum, and then from the rectum to the anus. The anus itself has 2 sets of sphincters. The internal sphincter is involuntary, the external sphincter is voluntary, so you do have control over that. So in this diagram, you can see from here is the ileum, so right here is the ileocecal sphincter, so movement of substances from small intestines into the cecum, which is the screener area. Right here is your appendix. You don't want that to get inflamed. That's what's known as a vestigial structure. It's leftover. It really doesn't have a function anymore. It's leftover from way back. So a lot of people can manage to get through life without any problems, but some people, if it gets inflamed, you do not want that to rupture, because if it does, anything in your intestines can flow out, and it's now in your abdominal pelvic area, which can cause massive infection. It can actually be fatal if left untreated, and so you don't want this little guy getting infected. So the substances move from the small intestines into the cecum, up the ascending colon, around this little turn right here. Now you're on the transverse colon. Now you make this turn right here to the descending colon. Now it's going to move through the sigmoid. This is kind of almost like an S-shaped, and then down through the rectum where it can be stored, and then finally be released from the body. Some unique features with the large intestines: you do have smooth muscle bands and muscle layers in your longitudinal muscle layers that are known as the tenai coli. There are pouches that are known as the hostra area, and then you have these epiploidic appendages, these little fat-filled sacs. These are all found in here. The pouches, just so you know, FYI, some people, diverticulitis, oftentimes in those pouches of the large intestines, little food items get kind of stuck in there, and so sometimes an individual might have to watch their diet as to what they eat to make sure food items don't get stuck in those pouches. In terms from a microbiology standpoint of what's in the large intestines, you do have, as I said, enteric bacteria. Enteric means that it's typically living in the intestines. As I said, not all of these are bad. Non-pathogenic means it's non-disease causing for humans. They live in association with us because we're providing their foods. For us, it's waste products, but for the bacteria, it's food. And they are carrying out their own digestion there and can synthesize different things like biotin and vitamin K. It is a balancing act as far as making sure those bacteria stay where they're supposed to be and do not penetrate into the body itself. But a normal, healthy individual, everything stays in a nice balance. If the waste items are moving too fast through the intestines, where there's not enough time for you to absorb that water back into the body, then you'll end up with diarrhea. If it moves too slow and you're reabsorbing too much of the water, then you're going to end up constipated. In terms of some of the accessory structures that are present with the digestive system, you have the liver. The liver, and this is where some of these, you may remember, have dual functions with multiple systems. So they might be involved with the endocrine system, etc. So the liver produces bile salts. Bile is necessary for helping to break down lipids. Okay. Now, a lot of people think, oh, okay, the gallbladder makes the bile. No, the liver makes the bile and then it stores it in the gallbladder. So when you have the liver is making the bile, you have excess bile, it gets stored in the gallbladder. The pancreas is another accessory structure. Pancreas is producing some of your digestive enzymes. It's producing bicarbonate, which has to do with the pH of the blood. And remember, carbon dioxide combines with it, so it's involved with that. The pancreatic juices help to neutralize the chyme as it's coming out of the stomach and into the small intestines. So in this diagram, you can see some of these accessory structures. Here is the pancreas is labeled here. That's what this yellow structure is. Your liver right here. And then this green is the gallbladder. Your stomach, we'll see in another picture, your stomach is right in here. The gallbladder, I just want to say, some of you may be aware of this if you hunt. Here's an enlarged picture showing that gallbladder. As I said, the bile is stored there. Bile stinks horribly. So you really do not want to rupture the gallbladder. So that's what I'm saying. If you're a hunter, you may be familiar with this. It's just tucked under the liver, this little lobule. Don't cut that, don't rupture it, because it will stink. Now, if somebody produces gallstones and they have to have the gallbladder removed, they may have to alter their diet some in terms of their fat intake. Just from the standpoint, the liver is still producing the bile, but you don't have excess bile stored anywhere to break down the fat. So you're probably going to have to decrease your fat intake a bit, because you don't have a storage facility to store the excess bile. And this drawing here is just showing a nice summary of your food is coming down the esophagus to the stomach. And then notice right under the stomach is tucked under here, this yellow is the pancreas. So as the food comes from the stomach, it's mixed there. Now as it moves from the stomach, it's tucked right underneath here. Part of the large intestines is in front, so you can't see. But as it moves right here from the stomach into the small intestines, this little blue area right here, you can kind of see the pancreatic juices, the bile. They're coming through this ductwork and are being released into the small intestines right here. Neutralize the acidity, start breaking down carbohydrates, lipids, etc. So all that was made here, the bile in the liver, excess stored in the gallbladder, comes down. Then as the food items are traveling through the small intestines, you are absorbing all of those nutrients, and then right here move into the large intestines, up around, reabsorb any water, compact the waste, you can store it temporarily, and then release it from the body.